At the conclusion of the 2023-2024 season, Purdue center Zach Edey, for the second season in a row, was selected as the unanimous Men's College Basketball Player of the Year. This is an incredible feat that he's certainly earned, and based on his achievements, many likely make the assumption that he's surely a future NBA star. However, even despite being the so-called best player in college basketball, there's countless skeptics making claims about him not being an NBA-level talent, and most mock drafts have him outside of the top 10. And believe it or not, this actually happens more often than you might think. There's the common notion that college success doesn't always equate to NBA success, and this holds true even for the best players in college basketball. And this got me thinking, how much success have the previous players of the year found in the NBA? Well, today, I aim to answer that question by looking at the last 10 college players of the year and analyzing how their NBA careers have turned out. And just a side note, if you're not aware, there's actually not a singular Player of the Year award, rather there's actually 6 different organizations that sponsor their own versions of the award. In many cases, all the sponsoring organizations do agree on one unanimous Player of the Year, but there are also certain seasons where there is technically more than one Player of the Year. But for the sake of this video, if the Player of the Year isn't unanimous, then I'm instead going to talk about the player that was selected for the most Player of the Year awards out of the 6. Now with the introduction out of the way, let's get into the first player starting in 2013. In the 2012-2013 season, sophomore point guard Trey Burke from Michigan was almost unanimously agreed upon as the best player in college basketball, being just one award away from sweeping the Player of the Year podium, with the only exception being the Sporting News Player of the Year, which was awarded to Victor Oladipo at Indiana. Burke was absolutely electrifying in his sophomore season, putting up averages of over 18 points, 6 assists, and almost 2 steals a game, being the driving engine behind a Michigan team which went 31-8, the best season for the program in over 20 years. His dominance would continue into the March Madness tournament, leading his squad all the way to the championship game, where they would unfortunately be taken down by Louisville. Nonetheless, after declaring for the draft, NBA scouts were very high on him for his well-rounded offensive game, and he was widely considered to be the best point guard in the draft. He was deadly in the pick and roll, could create his own shot, had elite change of pace, and was also a solid perimeter shooter. His smaller frame did lead to some questions regarding potential injury concerns and his ability to play defense, but his skill set and potential is way too much to overlook, and he'd be selected 9th overall by the Minnesota Timberwolves and then immediately traded to the Utah Jazz. Unfortunately for Burke, his NBA career never quite panned out as many expected. He flashed a lot of potential during his first few years in Utah, being selected to the All-Rookie team and putting some quality games together, but overall just wasn't very consistent and really struggled with the shooting. And after the Jazz made the decision to move on, he was never really able to find a consistent role with any other team, being a piece in several trades and being relegated to the G League on multiple occasions. Despite having some impressive games over the years, his inefficiency and lack of consistency made it hard for teams to keep him around, and his last NBA appearance was in the 2022 season with the Dallas Mavericks. Moving on to the 2014 season, Creighton's senior forward Doug McDermott was the unquestioned Player of the Year, sweeping the podium and taking home every Player of the Year award. McDermott lit up the stat sheet his final college season, leading the entire country in scoring at 26.7 points a game to go along with 7 rebounds. He'd lead his Creighton squad to a strong 27-8 record and an at-large berth to the NCAA tournament, where they'd eventually be eliminated in the round of 32. Going into the draft, McDermott was praised for his all-around scoring ability, being able to shoot the 3-ball, create off the dribble, post up, and finish around the rim. And he was a highly efficient player as well, shooting 53% from the field and 45% from 3. There were concerns regarding his athleticism and whether he'd be able to handle NBA athletes, but his offensive talent would still get him drafted with the 11th pick by the Denver Nuggets and then traded to the Chicago Bulls. During his time in the NBA, his 3-level scoring wasn't ever quite able to fully translate, being as he didn't have the same size advantage as he did in college, and couldn't create the same amount of separation against NBA defenders. However, he still found himself a steady role in the NBA as a highly effective 3-point specialist, being a career 41% shooter from behind the arc. His catch-and-shoot ability makes him a plug-and-play for virtually any team, which has led to him still sticking around on NBA rosters to this day. So, while he never developed into the deadly 3-level scorer as many hoped, he still managed to carve out a solid career for himself as a role player. The 2015 season saw yet another unanimous Player of the Year, with Wisconsin forward Frank Kaminsky taking home all the major awards. Averaging over 18 points, 8 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks a game, Kaminsky was a pivotal piece for a Badger team which went 36-4 and cruised through the NCAA tournament. His team would make it all the way to the championship game before taking a loss at the hand of Duke. Following the loss, Kaminsky would declare for the draft, where many scouts viewed him as a highly intriguing prospect. Standing at 7 feet tall and weighing 230 pounds, he had solid NBA size, but was also a highly capable perimeter shooter, shooting 42% from 3 his final collegiate season. The big concern, however, was his clear lack of athleticism and lateral movement, which had the potential to be exploited by opposing offenses. However, despite the concerns, his steady offensive game and exciting ability as a stretch big would get him drafted 9th overall by the Charlotte Hornets. Unfortunately for Kaminsky, his NBA career has been highly underwhelming. His calling card as a stretch big didn't translate nearly as well as scouts hoped, being just 35% from 3, and despite being over 7 feet tall, he doesn't rebound very well either, averaging just a little over 3 per game. Those weaknesses, to pair with the fact that he's a below-average NBA athlete, led to very sparse playing time, and as of this video, he's currently out of the NBA and playing in the EuroLeague. In the 2016 season, the Player of the Year was much more debated than in previous seasons, with Oklahoma's Buddy Hield and Michigan State's Denzel Valentine being the two frontrunners. In the end though, Buddy Hield would be more favored for the title, taking home all but 2 of the major awards, with Valentine being given AP Player of the Year and NABC Player of the Year. In his final year with Oklahoma, the senior shooting guard put up averages of 25 points, over 5 rebounds, and over 1 steal per game. Being the best player and primary scoring option for the team, Hield led the Sooners to a 29-8 record, and a deep March Madness tournament run all the way to the Final Four. Going into the draft, the main strength for Hield was his elite shooting ability, being a 46% shooter from behind the arc. His shooting ability gave him a nice floor as a prospect, and made him a good fit for almost any team. The main question for Hield was if he'd be able to develop his offensive game around his shooting, and if he'd be able to put his solid frame to good use as a defender. He'd go on to be drafted with the 6th pick by the New Orleans Pelicans, who were willing to take a gamble on his potential. His time with the Pelicans would be short though, as he'd be shipped off to the Kings as one of the key pieces in the DeMarcus Cousins trade. And fortunately for the Kings, Hield would see a lot of development during his time there. He's become one of the best 3-point specialists in the NBA, being a career 40% shooter on high volume, but has also managed to expand his offensive game to be more than just a catch-and-shoot guy, and was even a borderline 20-point-per-game scorer at one point in his career. Being as he's now past his prime, his production has started to slow down a bit, but even now, he's one of the best shooters in the NBA, and in the current era of basketball where shooting reigns king, he's surely to provide a lot of value for teams for several more seasons. Following the highly debated Player of the Year conversation the previous season, the 2017 season, on the other hand, would see another unanimous winner, with senior Kansas point guard Frank Mason III taking home the honors. In his final collegiate season, Frank led the Jayhawks to a 31-5 record behind averages of almost 21 points, over 5 assists, and 4 rebounds a game, making a run all the way to the Elite Eight. Upon declaring for the draft, Frank brought with him tons of experience and a unique winning pedigree that not many other prospects had, winning over 90 games during his time in college. On top of that, his explosiveness, good touch around the rim, and knockdown shooting ability made him a highly intriguing point guard prospect. However, some of the big knocks on him were his small frame, as well as questions about his fit in the NBA, and if he had enough of a point guard skill set outside of scoring to really be an impactful player. The concerns regarding his size and play style would see him fall quite a bit in the draft, being selected in the 2nd round with the 34th pick by the Sacramento Kings. Frank, during his time in the NBA, proved to be a steady presence off the bench as a scorer and improved facilitator, but a combination of poor shooting and defensive struggles led to not much consistent playing time. His stint in the NBA would be short, last making an NBA appearance with the Bucks in 2020, and is now playing overseas. In 2018, the unanimous Player of the Year is someone that's likely a bit more recognizable, and that's junior point guard out of Villanova, Jalen Brunson. Averaging almost 19 points, 4 assists, and 3 rebounds, Brunson was one of the most pivotal pieces on an absolutely loaded Villanova squad, which went 36-4 that year, helping lead them to a national championship. After his storied college career, NBA scouts weren't really quite sure what to make of him. He was without a doubt a solid player, but he didn't necessarily have any traits or skills that really made him stand out to the point of being worthy of a top pick. He had decent size, average athleticism, solid shooting and passing, and was a serviceable defender, but many weren't quite sure how high his ceiling truly was. And with the draft being all about potential, Brunson would fall to the 2nd round, being drafted 33rd overall by the Dallas Mavericks. And after being a solid role player his first couple seasons in the NBA, he'd go on to see drastic improvements and development, eventually earning himself a big contract from the Knicks to be their franchise player. Although it was a big risk at the time for the Knicks, it would end up being a great move as he's now developed into an all-star caliber player, and this most recent season averaged over 28 points and almost 7 assists per game. He's become an elite scorer, capable of scoring at all 3 levels, and was the focal point for a Knicks team which saw their most successful season in years. It's crazy to think that at one point, NBA scouts weren't sold on his potential, but seeing the player he's now developed into, Knicks fans should be very excited for what the future holds. The 2019 season saw freshman forward Zion Williamson out of Duke be named the unanimous Player of the Year. I think it goes without saying that achieving this award as a freshman is truly rare, accomplished by only the most gifted and truly dominant players, and Zion definitely fits that bill, as he averaged over 22 points, just under 9 rebounds, over 2 steals, and 1 block per game. For a Duke team that year that was spearheaded by freshman talent, Zion was the driving force behind the Blue Devils' 29-8 record, leading the squad to the Elite Eight, exerting his dominance and creating countless highlights along the way. As expected, he was 1-and-done in college, and his insane athleticism and strength made him a very unique and polarizing prospect. His physical tools alone gave him superstar potential in the NBA, but at the same time, someone jumping that high with that size was certainly going to create some injury concerns. Additionally, he was the definition of a raw prospect. He had all the athletic tools, but he was a subpar ball handler and shooter, average at best passer, and had no real ability to facilitate an offense. However, his arguably generational physical gifts were just too much for teams to pass on, and he'd be selected with the first overall pick by the New Orleans Pelicans. And when he's been on the floor, he certainly looked like the star player he was hyped up to be, averaging over 24 points a game for his career thus far and shooting almost 60% from the field. Not only that, his physical tools have allowed him to be a human highlight reel and one of the most entertaining players to watch in the NBA, with fans at the edge of their seat every game waiting for him to pull off a crazy physical feat. The only issue, however, has been his lack of availability, as he's really struggled to stay healthy his first 4 years in the NBA, which has created legitimate concerns of how much longevity he really has. Hopefully, he can continue to develop his game to not rely solely on his athleticism to help extend the life of his career, because when he has been on the floor, he has surely shown to be one of the most gifted and entertaining players to watch in the NBA. Speaking of human highlight reels, the 2020 Player of the Year was yet another uber-athletic forward in Dayton sophomore Obi Toppin. He was 1 award shy of sweeping the award podium, with the only exception being the Sporting News Player of the Year, which went to Iowa's Luka Garza. In his sophomore collegiate season, Toppin put up averages of 20 points, 7.5 rebounds, as well as chipping in 1 block and 1 steal per game, and led his team to a 29-2 record, before the season was officially cut short due to COVID. Despite the disappointing end to his college career, Toppin would declare for the draft and was considered one of the top prospects in the class. Not only did he possess good NBA size and elite athleticism, he also showcased some solid shooting touch during his time at Dayton, knocking down threes at a 39% clip. His offensive game certainly wasn't too diverse outside of dunking and shooting threes, but scouts thought if he could expand his offensive capabilities, he had the potential to be a perennial 20-point per game scorer, and this certainly sounded good to the Knicks, who would go on to select him with the 8th pick in the draft. Unfortunately, his time in New York would be pretty unnoteworthy, as he was never quite able to find a suitable role in their offense. He was a player best suited for a faster-paced offense that liked to push and transition, and with the Knicks being a slower-paced team, it became obvious that the two just weren't a good fit. As such, he would eventually be shipped out to the Indiana Pacers, where he looks much more at home playing alongside an elite facilitator in Tyrese Halliburton. He's put up career highs across the board, and has even managed to regain the shooting touch he showed in college, shooting 40% from 3 on the season. While it looks unlikely he'll ever become the perennial 20-point per game scorer scouts thought he could be, it still seems as though he's developing into a solid player that can be a valuable contributor for several teams. After finishing as the runner-up for Player of the Year the previous season, Iowa senior forward Luka Garza would come back with a vengeance and become the unanimous Player of the Year in 2021. Off the back of his 24 points, 8 rebounds, and over 1.5 blocks a game, he'd lead his Iowa squad to a 22-9 record in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Measuring in at 6'11", 245 pounds, he was a force in the post, showcasing a diverse set of moves and having good touch around the rim, shooting 55% from the field. However, he was much more than just a post player, possessing the capability to step out to three-point range, shooting 44% from 3 his senior season. His offensive capabilities on their own made him a very intriguing prospect. However, the main weakness that held him back from being a top pick was his lack of athleticism and foot speed, which had the potential to be exploited in the NBA. He'd eventually go on to be selected in the second round with the 52nd pick by the Pistons, where he'd go on to dominate the Summer League and in the G League. However, he got very limited action in the NBA, and after the Pistons declined his second-year team option, he'd signed a 2-way contract with the Timberwolves. He's continued to spend time going back and forth between the G League and NBA, but fortunately for Garza, at the beginning of April, his contract would be converted to a full-time NBA contract, allowing him to be with a team for the playoffs. While it's unlikely he'll ever be a star player, hopefully he can continue to capitalize on his limited NBA opportunities and become a quality piece in a team's rotation, because he certainly has the offensive talent to be in the NBA. Finishing up, the 2022 unanimous Player of the Year was Kentucky forward Oscar Tshiebwe. In his junior campaign, he proved to be a force in the paint, averaging over 17 points, 15 rebounds, and over a block per game. He was the muscle and heart of a Kentucky team which won 26-8 on the year, before eventually being upset in the first round of the NCAA tournament. After the disappointing loss his junior year, Oscar would decide to return to the Wildcats for his senior season, where he was in strong contention for repeating as Player of the Year. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the case, with his stats actually taking a dip across the board and hurting his draft stock that even going into the season wasn't too high. While he was certainly an exceptional college player and the best rebounder in the class, he's one of those guys that doesn't really fit the NBA mold, being undersized for a big man and not really having the athleticism or offensive ability to make up for it. This would cause him to go undrafted, but he'd go on to sign a two-way deal with the Indiana Pacers, where he's been an absolute monster in the G League. In his rookie season, he'd lead the G League in rebounding at an absurd 16.2 per game, to go along with racking up 27 double-doubles and eventually being named the G League's Rookie of the Year. Although he's not your prototypical NBA big man, I feel that he's definitely deserving of a shot, given his dominance in the G League. Hopefully going into his second season, he can get some more NBA opportunities to prove to NBA scouts that he definitely belongs at the highest level of basketball. So that was the last 10 players of the year in college basketball and how their careers have turned out so far. Overall, there's actually been a pretty wide range of success, with some turning into star players, others becoming solid role players, and others fizzling out of the NBA after just a couple seasons. I think this just goes to show how difficult it is to project how players will translate to the NBA, and that what you accomplished in your collegiate career has no bearing or implications for NBA success. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel for more sports content. If you have any thoughts on the players in this video, or have any other video ideas, be sure to leave them in the comments. This is HGP signing off. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm out.